September 23, 1955. A courtroom in Sumner, Mississippi. 100 degrees outside, hotter inside. Ceiling fans pushing warm air in slow circles over the heads of 300 white spectators. A handful of black journalists seated in a roped-off section by the window, and 12 white men in a jury box who had been deliberating for just over an hour. They had been asked to decide whether 2 white men murdered a 14-year-old black boy from Chicago named Emmett Till. The foreman stood. The judge asked for the verdict. And in a room where the outcome had been decided before the trial began, the word came down: not guilty. 67 minutes. That is how long the jury deliberated. One of the jurors told reporters afterward that it would have been faster, but they stopped to drink soda pop so it wouldn't look like they'd rushed. A boy was dead. His killers walked free. And somewhere in Chicago, a mother who had already made the bravest decision of her life was about to make another one. Most people hear this story and know immediately where they stand. The facts seem simple. A child was murdered. The murderers confessed. Justice failed. But the part of this story that still haunts America 70 years later is not what happened to Emmett Till. It is what America did with what happened, and what it is still doing, and what it says about every single one of us who thinks we would have done something different. To understand that, you have to understand who Emmett Till was before he became a symbol, before the photographs, before the speeches, before his name became a word that meant something larger than any single life should ever have to mean. He was a boy, and his mother adored him. Emmett Louis Till was born on July 25, 1941, in Chicago, Illinois. His mother, Mamie Till-Mobley, was 20 years old. His father, Louis Till, had already begun to disappear from their lives. The marriage didn't last. Louis Till was drafted into the army, sent to Italy during the Second World War, and executed by military court-martial in 1945. Emmett never knew his father. He grew up knowing only his mother. And Mamie was enough. She raised him on the south side of Chicago, in the Argo Summit neighborhood, a working-class community just outside the city where black families had settled during the Great Migration. That decades-long exodus of millions of African Americans fleeing the violence, poverty, and suffocating racial codes of the Deep South for something that at least resembled opportunity. Mamie's own family had made that journey from Mississippi to Illinois when she was a child. She knew both worlds. She knew what her family had left behind, and she knew why they had left. Mamie was sharp, determined, and fiercely protective. She was one of the first black students at her high school to make the honor roll. She worked for the Air Force as a civilian clerk, earned a steady paycheck, and built a stable home for her son. In a world that tried to make black motherhood invisible, Mamie Till-Mobley was anything but. Chicago was no paradise. It had its own racism, its own invisible fences, its own ways of telling black families where they did and did not belong. But it was not Mississippi. In Chicago, a black child could ride the bus, walk into a store, drink from any fountain. The rules that govern survival in the South, the rules about how a black person must speak to a white person, where to look, what to say, when to disappear. Those rules did not apply in the same way on the south side of Chicago. And that difference would turn out to matter more than anyone could have imagined. Emmett was a happy child. Energetic, funny, social, a little bit of a show-off, the kind of kid who walked into a room and immediately became the center of it. He had a round, open face and a smile that people remembered decades later. He contracted polio as a young boy, and it left him with a slight stutter, but it never slowed him down. If anything, it made him more determined to be heard. He learned to pause before difficult words, to push through the hesitation, to keep talking even when the syllables didn't cooperate. His friends remembered him as someone who could make anyone laugh, who loved pranks and practical jokes, who was always performing for an audience even if the audience was just his mother sitting at the kitchen table after a long day's work. He liked baseball, he liked comic books, he liked dressing sharp. Mamie made sure of that. He was the kind of kid who would iron his own clothes and check himself in the mirror twice before walking out the door. He had an easy confidence about him, a way of being in the world that suggested he had not yet learned to be afraid of it. Mamie doted on him. He was her only child. She worked long hours, made sure he was fed and dressed well, made sure he understood that he mattered. She also made sure he understood something else. Something that every black mother in America in the 1950s had to teach her children, especially her sons. She taught him the rules. Not the rules of school or church or polite society, the other rules, the unwritten ones. The ones that don't appear in any textbook but that every black mother in America in the 1950s knew by heart, because her mother had taught them to her, and her mother's mother before that. Don't look a white woman in the eye. Don't talk back to a white man. Say yes, sir, and no, sir, and nothing else. Step off the sidewalk if a white person is walking toward you. If you are in a store, keep your hands visible at all times. If a white man insults you, take it. If a white woman speaks to you, lower your eyes. Make yourself small. Make yourself invisible. Because in certain parts of this country, being a black boy who forgot those rules, even for a second, even by accident, even if you didn't know the rules existed, could cost you everything. Emmett listened. He always listened to his mother. But he was 14 years old, and he had grown up in a city where those rules did not govern daily life in the same way, and the South was a place he had only heard about in stories his mother told and warnings she repeated. It was abstract to him, distant, a set of rules for a world he had never lived in and could not quite imagine. In August of 1955, Mamie made a decision she would question for the rest of her life. She agreed to let Emmett visit relatives in Mississippi. His great-uncle, Mose Wright, was a 64-year-old cotton sharecropper who lived near the town of Money in the Mississippi Delta, the flattest, hottest, poorest, and most racially oppressive stretch of land in America. Emmett's cousins from Chicago were going, and Emmett begged to go along. He had never been to the South. He wanted to see the cotton fields, ride horses, fish in the creeks. He wanted an adventure. Mamie was uneasy. She knew Mississippi. Her family had fled it a generation earlier for a reason. She knew what the Delta did to black people who forgot their place, or who had never been taught what that place was supposed to be. Before Emmett left, Mamie sat him down one more time. She went through the rules again, carefully, seriously. She told him Mississippi was not Chicago. She told him that white people down there lived by a different set of expectations. She told him to be humble, to be careful, to say yes, ma'am, and no, sir, and nothing more. She told him that whatever happened, whatever anyone said to him, however unfair it seemed, he should hold his tongue and keep his head down. She told him his life might depend on it. Emmett promised. He kissed his mother goodbye at the Illinois Central train station on August 20th. He was smiling. He was excited. He was wearing his good clothes and carrying a suitcase and heading south for the first time in his life. He would never come home alive. What happened next would change America. But first, America would have to decide whether it wanted to look. Emmett arrived in Mississippi and settled into the rhythm of his uncle's world. Cotton fields stretching to the horizon. Dirt roads, the kind of heat that sits on your chest. He spent his days with his cousins and local boys, picking cotton, swimming in creeks, doing what boys do in the summer when the days are long and there is nothing to hurry toward. On the evening of August 24th, 1955, Emmett and a group of boys drove to Bryant's grocery and meat market in Money, Mississippi. It was a small, wooden store on a rural crossroads, a weathered building with a Coca-Cola sign and a screened door. The kind of place where black sharecroppers bought candy and soda and not much else. Behind the counter was a 21-year-old white woman named Carolyn Bryant. Her husband, Roy, was a truck driver who hauled shrimp from the Gulf Coast. He was out of town that week. What happened inside that store has been debated for 70 years. And the debate matters because a boy's life ended over it. Carolyn Bryant would later tell a courtroom that Emmett grabbed her by the waist, made lewd verbal advances, and whistled at her suggestively as she walked away. She described herself as frightened and offended. Her testimony painted a picture of a brazen young man who had crossed every boundary that the Jim Crow South held sacred. Emmett's cousins, who were waiting outside, told a very different story. They said Emmett walked in, bought 2 cents worth of bubble gum, and walked out. One cousin said Emmett may have said, "Bye, baby," a phrase that could have been a 14-year-old's attempt at being cool, or could have been his stutter catching on a word and producing something that sounded like something it wasn't. Another said Emmett whistled outside the store, but that it was something he did to manage his stutter, a technique Mamie had taught him. What none of them described was a boy who grabbed anyone, or threatened anyone, or did anything other than act like a 14-year-old who had not yet learned that in Mississippi, acting like yourself could get you killed. What is not debated is what happened next. Decades later, in 2008, Carolyn Bryant admitted to historian Timothy Tyson that her claim that Emmett had physically touched her was not true. The part that mattered most, the part that sealed a boy's fate, had been a lie. But by then, the lie had already done everything a lie can do. When Roy Bryant returned home and heard his wife's account of what happened in the store, he did not call the police. He did not ask questions. He called his half-brother. J.W. Milam was 36 years old, 6'2", 235 pounds. A decorated World War II veteran who had come home from Europe with a Silver Star and a disposition that his neighbors described as mean. He owned a truck. He owned guns. And he believed, as he would later tell a reporter with perfect clarity, that there were certain things a white man had to do to keep order. On the night of August 28th, 4 days after the grocery store encounter, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam drove to Mose Wright's cabin at 2:30 in the morning. They carried flashlights and a .45 caliber pistol. They banged on the door. Mose Wright, 64 years old, opened it to find 2 armed white men standing in the darkness. The men asked for the boy from Chicago, the one who did the talking at the store. Mose Wright, his wife Elizabeth, beside him, begged them. He said Emmett was just a child, just 14 years old. He said the boy was from up north. He didn't know the customs down here. He didn't mean anything by it. He offered to pay them. He offered to whip the boy himself. Please, just leave him alone. He's just a boy. They did not leave him alone. They pushed past Mose Wright, found Emmett in the back room, and dragged him out in his underwear. They threw him into the bed of a pickup truck and drove into the Mississippi darkness. Mose Wright's wife, Elizabeth, heard Emmett's voice asking what he had done. No one answered him. What followed, according to their own later confession, was hours of beating in a barn on Milam's property. They pistol-whipped him. They beat him with their fists and with tools. They gouged out one of his eyes. And when Emmett Till, 14 years old, 150 pounds, reportedly refused to beg, refused to get on his knees, refused to say he was sorry for something he may not have done, J.W. Milam said something he would later repeat to a magazine reporter with no trace of shame and no flicker of doubt. He said he made up his mind right then. He said the boy had to go. They drove Emmett to the bank of the Tallahatchie River in the gray light before dawn. Milam shot him once in the head. just above the right ear. They tied a 75-pound cotton gin fan to his neck with barbed wire, and they rolled him into the water. 3 days later, on August 31st, Emmett Till's body surfaced. It was so badly decomposed and mutilated that his great-uncle Mose Wright could only identify him by the ring on his finger. A silver ring engraved with his father's initials, LT, that Mamie had given Emmett before he left Chicago. Mississippi authorities wanted to bury him immediately, right there in Mississippi, in a sealed casket. They did not want that casket opened. They did not want anyone to see what was inside. But Mamie Till-Mobley had other plans. And what she did next is the reason you know this story. When the casket arrived in Chicago, the funeral home workers told Mamie not to open it. Mississippi had sealed it with strict orders. The smell alone was unbearable. What was inside, they said, was not something a mother should see. Mamie opened it. She looked at what had been done to her son. His face was unrecognizable. His skull was crushed. One eye was missing. His features had been beaten into something that no longer resembled a human face. And then Mamie Till-Mobley made the decision that changed the course of American history. She said, "I want the world to see what they did to my baby." She insisted on an open casket. She insisted that the funeral be public. She insisted that photographers be allowed inside. She refused to let America look away. The funeral was held at Robert's Temple Church of God in Christ on the south side of Chicago. Over the course of 3 days, somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 people filed past that open casket. They saw what Carolyn Bryant's lie and Roy Bryant's rage and J.W. Milam's pistol had produced. They saw what Mississippi had tried to bury in a sealed box. And then Jet magazine published the photographs. A full-page image of Emmett Till's destroyed face appeared in the September 15, 1955 issue. The photograph was reprinted in black newspapers across the country. It was passed from hand to hand, pinned on church bulletin boards, slipped into envelopes, and mailed to relatives in the South. America had never been forced to look at something like this before. And for Black America in particular, that photograph was not just evidence of a crime. It was evidence of a system that could do this to a child and expect no one to notice. But Mamie Till-Mobley had made sure they noticed. And now the whole country was watching what Mississippi would do next. But before the trial, before the verdict, before any of what was about to happen, Mamie Till-Mobley had already won the only battle that history would remember. She had forced America to look, and now the question was whether looking would be enough. The trial of Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam opened on September 19, 1955, in the Tallahatchie County Courthouse in Sumner, Mississippi. The town had a population of about 500. A painted sign on the courthouse lawn read, "A good place to raise a boy." That sign hung there throughout the trial. No one took it down. The courtroom was segregated. 300 white spectators filled the main floor and the balcony. Men in overalls and Sunday shirts sat shoulder to shoulder, some holding babies, some chewing tobacco. Black journalists and observers, including Mamie Till-Mobley herself, who had traveled from Chicago to attend, were confined to a card table near the windows, separated from the rest of the gallery by an invisible line that everyone understood. The temperature inside the courtroom exceeded 100 degrees. Ceiling fans barely moved the air. Men fanned themselves with newspapers and hats. Women dabbed their foreheads with handkerchiefs. The judge, Curtis Swango, allowed cameras but struggled to keep order as reporters from across the country and from overseas jockeyed for position. The jury was 12 white men. This was not unusual. It was inevitable. In Tallahatchie County in 1955, not a single black citizen was registered to vote. No black residents appeared in the jury pool. The jury was drawn from a world in which black lives were not equal to white lives, and everyone in that courtroom understood this without anyone having to say it. The prosecution was led by Gerald Chatham, a white district attorney from Mississippi who, to his credit, and at considerable personal risk, prosecuted the case seriously. He called witnesses. He presented evidence. He did what the law required, even though the community around him did not want him to do it. And then came the moment that would define the trial. Mose Wright, 64 years old, a sharecropper who had spent his entire life in the Mississippi Delta, who had never challenged a white man in public, who understood better than anyone in that courtroom what happened to black men who stepped out of line. Mose Wright stood up in the witness chair. The prosecutor asked him, "Can you identify the man who came to your house and took the boy?" Mose Wright raised his right arm. He extended his finger. He pointed directly at J.W. Milam, sitting at the defense table. And in a voice that carried across the silent courtroom, he said two words. "There he is." In the Jim Crow South, this was not testimony. This was an act of war. A black man publicly accusing a white man of a crime in a courtroom filled with white spectators before a white jury in a county where the accuser had to live and work and survive. Mose Wright knew what he was risking. He did it anyway, and after the trial, he fled Mississippi with his wife and never returned. The defense attorneys, 5 of them, an unusually large team for a murder trial in a small Mississippi town, paid for by donations collected from white citizens across the state, built their case not on facts, but on doubt and identity. Their first argument was that the body pulled from the Tallahatchie River was so badly decomposed that it could not be positively identified as Emmett Till. The face was destroyed. The body was swollen beyond recognition. Perhaps, the defense suggested, the body belonged to someone else entirely. Perhaps it had been planted in the river by the NAACP, no less, as part of an elaborate scheme to embarrass Mississippi and manufacture a racial incident. This was, by any honest measure, an absurd theory. But it only needed to give 12 white men in Mississippi a reason to do what they already wanted to do. Their second argument was simpler. Even if the body was Emmett Till, the prosecution had not proven beyond a reasonable doubt that these 2 men were the ones who killed him. Yes, Mose Wright identified them. But it was dark that night. He was an old man. He was scared. Could he really be certain? The defense's closing argument abandoned even the pretense of legal reasoning. Attorney John Whitten told the jurors that their forefathers would turn over in their graves if they convicted these men. Another attorney, Sidney Carleton, told the jury that every last Anglo-Saxon one of them had the courage to free these defendants. The message was not subtle. It was not meant to be. These men were being asked not to weigh evidence, but to uphold an order, a racial order, an order that said a white man in Mississippi does not answer to a black boy's death, an order that said this courtroom, this jury box, this verdict, all of it existed to protect that principle and nothing else. Here is the thing about this trial that has never been resolved, and perhaps never will be. The prosecution presented a real case. Mose Wright identified the killers. The evidence pointed in one direction. Gerald Chatham did his job. By the standards of law, there was enough to convict. But by the standards of Mississippi in 1955, there was never any chance of conviction at all. The law said one thing. The world that built the courtroom said another. And both were telling the truth about what they were. The jury retired at 2:30 in the afternoon. 67 minutes later, they returned. The foreman stood. The courtroom fell silent. Not guilty. The white spectators erupted. Bryant and Milam grinned. Their wives rushed forward and kissed them in the courtroom. Photographers snapped pictures of the celebration. 2 men acquitted of murdering a child. surrounded by smiling faces, lighting cigars, shaking hands with well-wishers, as if they had just won a county fair prize. The images ran in newspapers across the country and around the world. Outside, Mamie Till-Mobley received the news. She had known it was coming. Everyone had known it was coming. That did not make it easier. One juror later told a reporter that the actual deliberation took far less than 67 minutes. They had agreed on the verdict almost immediately. They spent the remaining time drinking soda and waiting because they thought an instant acquittal would look bad. They were not wrong about that. But they did it anyway. What 12 men had done in 67 minutes, America would spend the next 70 years trying to understand. 4 months after the acquittal, something extraordinary happened. Something that, in any just world, would have been impossible. Protected by the legal principle of double jeopardy, which meant they could never be tried again for the same crime, no matter what they said, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam sold their story. They sold it the way you'd sell a truck or a piece of land. They put a price on it and found a buyer. Journalist William Bradford Huey paid them $4,000. That's roughly $45,000 in today's money. And in the January 1956 issue of Look magazine, under the headline, "The Shocking Story of a Proved Killing in Mississippi," J.W. Milam described in plain language exactly what they had done. He described how they went to the cabin, how they took the boy, how they beat him in the barn, how Emmett refused to show fear, refused to beg, refused to acknowledge that he had done anything wrong. Milam described the moment he decided to kill him. He described the gunshot. He described tying the cotton gin fan to the body. He described the river. He described it all without regret, without apology, without any apparent understanding that what he was confessing to was monstrous. He spoke as a man explaining a chore he'd had to do. Unpleasant, but necessary. $4,000. That was the price of a full, detailed, published confession to the murder of a 14-year-old boy. And because the law had already spoken, because a jury of 12 white men had already declared these men not guilty, there was nothing anyone could do about it. The confession sat there on the pages of a national magazine, read by millions, and the law was powerless to act on it. Bryant and Milam were never punished by the courts, but their lives did not go unpunished. The black community in the Delta refused to do business with them. Their stores failed. Their farms failed. Milam died of bone cancer in 1980, alone and broke. Bryant died in 1994. Neither man ever expressed remorse. Carolyn Bryant, the woman whose accusations started everything, lived for decades with a version of events she eventually admitted was not entirely true. She died in 2023. A grand jury had considered indicting her the year before but declined. But while the killers faded into obscurity, the boy they murdered became something they could never have imagined. Emmett Till became a catalyst. 3 months after his funeral, on December 1st, 1955, a 42-year-old seamstress in Montgomery, Alabama, refused to give up her seat on a city bus. Her name was Rosa Parks. Years later, she said she was thinking about Emmett Till when she made that decision. She said she saw his face. Martin Luther King Jr. invoked Emmett Till's name in his earliest speeches during the Montgomery bus boycott. The photograph of that open casket, the image Mamie had insisted the world see, became one of the founding documents of the civil rights movement. It was the proof that could not be denied, the evidence that could not be sealed in a box and buried in Mississippi soil. In 2022, 67 years after his murder, Emmett Till was posthumously awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. That same year, President Biden signed the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act into law, making lynching a federal hate crime for the first time in American history. The bill had been introduced and defeated more than 200 times over 120 years. It took until 2022 to pass. Mamie Till-Mobley spent the rest of her life making sure America never forgot her son. She became a teacher, she became an activist, she traveled the country speaking about what had happened and what still needed to change. She died in 2003 at the age of 81, having given nearly 50 years of her life to a cause that began with the worst thing a mother can experience. 70 years later, what Mamie Till-Mobley did in that funeral home remains one of the most radical acts of courage in American history. She took her private grief and made it public. She took what Mississippi wanted hidden and put it under lights. She refused to let America do what America does best: look away, move on, forget. And here is the part that does not fit neatly into a history lesson, the part that follows you out of this story and into your own life. In 1955, one photograph in one magazine changed a nation. It changed laws, it changed minds, it moved people to march and organize and demand something better. One image of one child was enough to make America stop and look and say, "This cannot continue." Today, we carry those images in our pockets. We see them every day, on our phones, on our screens, in an endless scroll of things that should be unbearable. And most of the time, we keep scrolling. Not because we don't care, but because there is so much to see that seeing has become a kind of blindness. Mamie Till-Mobley believed that if America saw what was done to her son, America would have to change. She was right, but she was right in a world where one photograph could hold a nation's attention long enough to break its heart. The question that Emmett Till's story leaves behind is not whether Mamie was brave. She was the bravest person in this entire story. The question is whether the world she trusted to look, to really look, is still capable of seeing. History remembers the verdict. We remember the people.